The Galactic Peace Summit on Harmony 7 was, to put it diplomatically, a complete dumpster fire. And that was being generous. The neutral space station, designed specifically for important meetings like this one, had all the charm of a corporate conference room crossed with a maximum security prison. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying, and the kind of uncomfortable chairs that made you wonder if the designers had ever actually sat down before. 3 weeks. 3 entire weeks of the galaxy's so-called finest diplomats sitting around a circular table, glaring at each other with the intensity of caffeinated squirrels protecting their nuts. On one side sat Ambassador Vextil of the crystalline hegemony, a being that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a chandelier and given it a superiority complex. Every word that came out of their crystalline vocal chambers dripped with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic math to particularly slow toddlers. Across from Vextel, Commander Grux of the Thurian Empire cracked his knuckles with sounds like breaking concrete. Picture a rhinoceros that hit the gym religiously, developed opposable thumbs, and decided that diplomacy was just warfare with more words. His idea of negotiation involved a lot of table pounding and casual mentions of his fleet's orbital bombardment capability. Between them sat Ambassador Quillen from the Feathered Coalition, a nervous bird-like creature who apologized for everything, including her own existence. She had been saying sorry for breathing too loudly for the past hour, which would have been endearing if it wasn't so tragically predictable. The territorial dispute they were supposed to resolve involved 3 star systems that nobody really wanted but everybody refused to give up, because apparently galactic politics operated on the same principles as kindergarten sandbox fights. That's when Jake Martinez walked in. Well, stumbled might be more accurate. The door slid open with a cheerful beep, and in came Earth's diplomatic representative, pushing a cart loaded with enough Earth snacks to feed a small army. Jake was what you might call diplomatically challenged. He had gotten this job through a series of bureaucratic accidents that would have been hilarious if they weren't so depressingly typical of government efficiency. Originally, he was supposed to be handling logistics, making sure the coffee machine worked and the bathrooms had toilet paper, but when Earth's actual ambassador came down with Regelian flu the day before departure, someone in a panic had promoted Jake to diplomatic liaison. Nobody had bothered to tell him what that actually meant. "Sorry I'm late," Jake announced cheerfully, completely oblivious to the atmosphere of barely contained homicidal rage that had been building in the room. "Traffic was murder, and then I had to stop by that little market on Deck 7. You guys would not believe the selection they have down there." The 3 alien diplomats stared at him with expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright horror. Here they were, engaged in negotiations that could determine the fate of entire civilizations, and the human had brought snacks. "I find your casual attitude toward these proceedings deeply offensive," Vextrel announced, in the tone of someone who found most things deeply offensive. Their crystalline features reflected the harsh lighting in sharp, judgmental angles. "We are discussing matters of galactic importance, not hosting some primitive feeding ritual." Commander Grux slammed his massive fist on the table, making the whole structure vibrate like a tuning fork. "The Thurian Empire does not negotiate with beings who show such blatant disrespect. Perhaps a demonstration of our military might would help focus your scattered human mind." "Oh, sorry about that," Quillen chirped nervously, somehow managing to apologize for Grux's outburst. "I should have warned you that Commander Grux gets a bit shouty when he's hungry. Not that I'm criticizing. I'm sure he has excellent reasons for being shouty. I apologize for even mentioning it." Jake paused in his unpacking, holding up a bag of Doritos like he was examining a fascinating alien artifact. "Wow, you guys are really committed to this whole dramatic soap opera thing, aren't you? I mean, 3 weeks of sitting in the same room, arguing about the same stuff? That's some serious dedication to being miserable." He continued pulling items from his cart with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling Christmas presents. "So let me get this straight. You," he pointed at Vextil, "think everyone else is beneath you and should just do what you say because you're sparkly. You," he gestured at Grux, "want to solve everything by hitting it really hard. And you," he looked at Quillen, "think everything is somehow your fault, including probably the heat death of the universe." The 3 diplomats stared at him in stunned silence. In 30 seconds, this random human had summarized their entire personalities with the accuracy of a surgical strike and all the tact of a brick through a window. "Is a gross oversimplification of complex political positions," Vextil said, but their voice lacked its usual confidence. "Is it though?" Jake asked, tearing open the Doritos bag. The smell of artificial cheese flavoring filled the diplomatic chamber. "Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like three people who forgot how to talk to each other like normal beings. Here, try one of these, big guy, he said, offering the bag to Grux. I do not consume unknown substances during negotiations, Grux declared, but his eyes lingered on the orange triangular chips with obvious curiosity. Come on, live a little. What's the worst that could happen? They're just corn with flavor dust. Unless you're allergic to fun, in which case, yeah, they might be dangerous. Against his better judgment, Grux reached out and took a single chip. He examined it suspiciously, sniffed it with nostrils that could probably detect explosives from 3 star systems away, then cautiously placed it in his mouth. His eyes widened. Then he grabbed the entire bag. By the warrior codes of my ancestors, Grux mumbled through a mouthful of Doritos, orange dust coating his intimidating fangs. These are acceptable provisions for battle. Battle? Jake laughed, pulling out more supplies from his magical cart of earth delicacies. Dude, you're eating snack food, not preparing for war? Though I guess for some people those are the same thing. Vextel watched this display with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. This is highly irregular. We have protocols, procedures. You cannot simply distribute random consumables during official proceedings. Watch me, Jake said cheerfully, producing a small packet that looked innocuous enough. Here, try these. They're called Pop Rocks. Fair warning though, they might blow your mind, literally. I do not require sustenance at this time, Vextil declared with crystalline dignity. Nobody requires Pop Rocks, that's what makes them awesome. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? You're made of crystal, right? This should be fascinating from a purely scientific perspective. The appeal to intellectual curiosity was apparently Vextel's weakness. They accepted the packet with the careful precision of someone handling potentially explosive materials, which, given their nature, wasn't entirely wrong. The moment the carbonated candy hit Vextel's crystalline oral cavity, their entire body began resonating with tiny harmonic frequencies. Their prismatic surface started refracting light in patterns that could probably be seen from orbit. What manner of sorcery is this? Vextel gasped, their voice now carrying undertones that sounded like a wind chime in a hurricane. The sensation is fizzy, Jake suggested helpfully. Revolutionary, Vextel breathed, their usual condescending tone replaced by something approaching wonder. Meanwhile, Quillen was eyeing the proceedings with the nervous energy of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. I don't want to be presumptuous, she chirped, but might there be something suitable for my dietary requirements? Not that I'm complaining. I'm perfectly content to watch everyone else enjoy themselves. Sorry for even asking. Jake's face lit up like he had just discovered fire. Oh, do I have something special for you? He rummaged through his supplies with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning and produced a container of chocolate chip cookies. These are what we call cookies. They're basically happiness in edible form. Quillen accepted one with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The moment she bit into it, her feathers literally ruffled with pleasure, creating a soft rustling sound like autumn leaves. By the 7 winds of the homeworld, she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been all day. This is extraordinary. The combination of sweetness and texture, the way the chocolate melts while the cookie maintains structural integrity. It's like poetry you can eat. Jake munched on a handful of trail mix while watching the 3 formerly hostile diplomats experience Earth snacks for the first time. You know what's funny? You've all been sitting here for 3 weeks arguing about who gets what rocks in space, but none of you bothered to figure out what you actually want. We want our territorial claims recognized, Grux said, but his heart wasn't really in it anymore. He was too busy trying to get every last Dorito crumb from the bag. Yeah, but why? Jake asked, like he was talking to particularly slow children. I mean, what are you actually going to do with these star systems? Build summer homes? Start mining operations? Use them as really expensive paperweights? What happened next could only be described as the galaxy's first documented case of diplomatic sugar rush. The effects hit each species differently, like watching 3 different chemical experiments unfold simultaneously. Vextel, still vibrating slightly from the Pop Rocks experience, suddenly became the most talkative being in the known universe. Words poured out of them in a crystalline cascade that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so overwhelming. You know what, Human Jake, you are absolutely correct. We have been approaching this entire situation with the intellectual sophistication of mineral deposits. The hegemony doesn't actually need those star systems. We simply cannot bear the thought of admitting that the Thurians or the Coalition might be more deserving of them than we are. It's purely a matter of pride, which is frankly beneath beings of our evolutionary advancement, but there you have it. Commander Grux, meanwhile, had discovered the magical properties of processed cheese powder. The orange dust had somehow triggered a neurochemical response in his warrior brain that was the exact opposite of his usual aggressive state. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his massive frame, and sighed with the contentment of a predator who had just finished a satisfying hunt. "The human speaks wisdom," Grux rumbled, his voice now carrying the mellow tones of someone who had found inner peace through artificial flavoring. "The Empire seeks these territories not for strategic value, but because our military doctrine demands we never appear weak. We fear that yielding even worthless space rocks might encourage our enemies to test our resolve. But perhaps there are other ways to demonstrate strength." Quillen, transformed by the magical combination of sugar, chocolate, and actual confidence, was experiencing what could only be described as a personality revelation. She sat up straighter, her feathers arranging themselves in patterns that suggested authority rather than anxiety. "And the Coalition," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in weeks, "has been claiming territorial rights we don't even want because we're terrified that if we don't grab everything we can, we'll be seen as pushovers by the larger powers. We've been so busy apologizing for existing that we forgot to ask ourselves what we actually need to thrive." Jake watched this transformation with the bemused expression of someone who had accidentally solved quantum physics while trying to figure out how to use a can opener. "Okay, this is getting weird, but also kind of awesome. You guys are actually talking to each other instead of at each other. Progress." He rummaged through his cart again, producing items with the theatrical flair of a magician pulling rabbits from hats. "But if we're really going to sort this mess out, we need to do this properly. None of this nibbling around the edges stuff. We need a real meal." From somewhere in the depths of his supply cart, Jake produced what could only be described as a miracle of human engineering. A large, flat box that emanated the most incredible aroma any of them had ever experienced. The smell hit the diplomatic chamber like a warm, cheesy tsunami. "Ladies, gentlemen, and crystalline beings of uncertain gender classification," Jake announced with the gravity of someone unveiling a work of art, "I present to you the crown jewel of human diplomatic cuisine, pizza." The three aliens stared at the open box like they were witnessing the birth of a new star. The pizza sat there in all its glory, cheese still bubbling slightly, pepperoni glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights, the crust golden brown and promising structural integrity that could support the weight of their collective hopes and dreams. What is it?" Quillen whispered, her voice filled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. "It's everything," Jake said simply. "Bread, cheese, sauce, toppings, all working together in perfect harmony. Kind of like what you three could be doing instead of fighting over space rocks." Grux reached for a slice with hands that could crush steel, but handled the pizza with the delicacy of someone performing surgery. The moment he took his first bite, his eyes rolled back in his head with pure bliss. "By the warrior ancestors," he moaned, "this is what we should be fighting for. Not territory, not pride. This magnificent creation." Vextel, still chattering at hyperspeed from their sugar high, managed to focus long enough to examine their slice with scientific precision. "The layered construction is ingenious. The way the flavors complement and enhance each other while maintaining distinct characteristics, it's like architectural engineering for the palate." But it was Quillen who had the most profound reaction. As she bit into her slice, tears began streaming down her feathered face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, overwhelming joy. "I understand now," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "This is what we've been missing. Not territory, or resources, or political dominance. We've been missing connection, community, the simple act of sharing something good with others." Jake nodded sagely, while demolishing his own slice with the efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before. "Now you're starting to get it. Most problems look a lot smaller when everyone's got a full stomach and isn't hangry anymore." The transformation that followed could only be described as miraculous, if miracles typically involved large amounts of melted cheese and a complete breakdown of 3 weeks' worth of diplomatic protocol. The four beings sat around the table, pizza grease on their fingers and something resembling actual conversation happening for the first time since the summit began. "I have a confession to make," Vextel announced, their crystalline voice now carrying notes of what could almost be called humility. The pop rocks had finally stopped fizzing, but the effect lingered, like a caffeine buzz made of pure honesty. "The hegemony's claim to the Kepler 442 system is entirely based on the fact that we discovered a particularly aesthetically pleasing nebula in the vicinity. We don't actually need the planets, we just wanted to put up a sign that says property of the crystalline hegemony, so other species would know we were there first. Rux nearly choked on his pizza, but it was laughter rather than food that caused the problem. The sound that emerged from the massive warrior was like boulders tumbling down a mountain, if boulders could express genuine amusement. "That is the most ridiculous territorial claim I have ever heard," he rumbled, wiping pizza grease from his chin with the back of his hand. "And I once had to mediate a dispute between two colonies fighting over who owned a particularly attractive asteroid. At least they wanted to mine it." "What about you, big guy?" Jake asked, reaching for another slice. "What's the Thurian Empire's deep, strategic reason for wanting these systems?" Rook's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment, if embarrassment could bench press a small moon. "The truth, our military academies use those systems for training exercises. The planets have interesting gravitational fields that make for challenging flight patterns, but we could find a dozen other systems with similar properties. We're really just arguing about them because—" He paused, his massive shoulders sagging slightly. "Because the Coalition wanted them first, and we couldn't let them think we were going soft." Quillen, who had been quietly working her way through her second slice of pizza with the methodical precision of someone making up for lost time, looked up with an expression that was part amusement and part exasperation. "Well, this is embarrassing," she said, her voice now carrying the confident tones of someone who had discovered both chocolate and her own backbone in the same day. "The Coalition's interest in those systems is purely scientific. We detected some unusual quantum fluctuations that our researchers wanted to study. Nothing that requires actual colonization or territorial control. We just needed permission to park a research station in the area for a few years." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jake slowly chewing his pizza while processing what he had just heard. "Let me get this straight," he said finally, his voice carrying the flat tones of someone who had just realized he was living in a sitcom. "You've been arguing for 3 weeks about who gets to control 3 star systems. One of you wants to put up a cosmic no trespassing sign, one of you wants a challenging obstacle course for flight school, and one of you just wants to park a science station there temporarily." He took another bite, chewed thoughtfully, and continued. "And none of you thought to mention these incredibly reasonable and completely non-conflicting goals until after the pizza arrived?" The 3 aliens looked at each other with expressions that would have been hilarious if they hadn't been so tragic. 3 weeks of posturing, threats, and barely contained hostility, all over a misunderstanding that could have been resolved in about 5 minutes, if anyone had bothered to ask the right questions. "In our defense," Vextel said weakly, "diplomatic protocol discourages revealing one's true objectives until strategic advantage can be established." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," Jake replied cheerfully. "And I once watched a guy try to fix a broken escalator by riding it backwards." He stood up and walked over to the wall display that had been showing the disputed star systems for the past 3 weeks. With the casual confidence of someone who had no idea what he was doing but was getting results anyway, he started sketching on the holographic interface with his finger. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Vextel, you get to put your pretty sign wherever you want. Make it sparkly, add some lights, knock yourselves out. Grux, you can use the systems for training exercises, but you have to promise not to blow anything up that the science people are studying. And Quillen, you get to park your research station wherever the quantum thingamajigs are most interesting." He stepped back and admired his handiwork, which looked less like a diplomatic solution and more like a child's drawing of space. "But here's the kicker. Instead of fighting over who controls what, you're all going to work together." The 3 diplomats stared at him like he had just suggested they juggle flaming chainsaws while riding unicycles. "Work together," Grooks repeated, as if the concept was so foreign it required translation. "Yeah, it's this crazy idea where people cooperate instead of trying to murder each other. Revolutionary stuff, I know." Jake grinned and pulled out his final ace in the hole, a bag of mixed nuts. "But first, we're going to institute what I'm calling the Snack Break Treaty." "The what now?" Quillen asked, though she was already eyeing the nuts with interest. "Simple. Before any serious negotiations, everyone has to sit down and share food together. No threatening, no posturing, no dramatic declarations of war. Just people eating together and talking like normal beings. You'd be amazed what a difference it makes when everyone's blood sugar is stable." Jake opened the nuts and set them in the center of the table. Almost without thinking, all 3 aliens reached for them simultaneously. Their hands met in the middle, and for a moment the gesture looked almost ceremonial. "You know what?" Vextel said slowly, their crystalline features reflecting the overhead lights in patterns that seemed somehow warmer than before. "This is possibly the most sensible diplomatic proposal I have ever heard." And the most delicious, Grux added, crunching on an almond with obvious satisfaction. Quillen nodded enthusiastically, her confidence growing with each passing moment. We could establish cultural exchange programs, share our food traditions. My people have a fermented grain dish that creates the most beautiful geometric patterns when it crystallizes. The Empire's battle rations are surprisingly nutritious, Grux offered. Though I admit, they could use some of that human flavor enhancement technology. And we could document the entire process, Vextel added, their scientific curiosity finally finding a productive outlet. A comprehensive study of interspecies culinary diplomacy. The academic papers alone would revolutionize our understanding of peaceful negotiation. Jake watched the three former enemies planning their future cooperation with the satisfied expression of someone who had accidentally solved world hunger while trying to make a sandwich. He had no idea what he had just unleashed, but it felt like the beginning of something important. You know what the best part is? He said, reaching for the last slice of pizza. You're going to have to explain to your respective governments that you solved a 3-week diplomatic crisis with snack food. The looks of dawning horror on their faces were absolutely priceless. 6 months later, Jake Martinez sat in what had once been a standard diplomatic office aboard Harmony 7, but now looked more like the world's most eclectic delicatessen. The walls were lined with shelves containing food samples from 47 different worlds, ranging from Vextel's crystalline sugar formations that tasted like starlight and made your teeth tingle, to Grux's protein bars that could probably stop a small-caliber bullet, but somehow tasted like chocolate cake. His official title, emblazoned on a door plaque that still made him laugh every time he saw it, read, Jake Martinez, Chief of Snack Diplomacy Galactic Peace Initiative. It was a position that technically shouldn't have existed, but had somehow become the most requested diplomatic posting in known space. The transformation had been swift and, frankly, ridiculous. Within 2 weeks of the Great Pizza Breakthrough, as the galactic media had dubbed it, 3 more territorial disputes had been resolved, using what was now officially called the Martinez method. The process was elegantly simple. Lock the opposing parties in a room with a variety of Earth snacks, wait for the inevitable food-induced honesty to kick in, then watch them realize they were arguing over things that could be easily shared or didn't matter in the first place. Jake's computer chimed with an incoming transmission, and the holographic display flickered to life, revealing the familiar faces of his 3 favorite former enemies. They were broadcasting from the set of their new show, Cooking Across the Cosmos, which had somehow become the most popular program in 17 different star systems. Jake, Quillen chirped, her feathers now arranged in what could only be described as a confident coiffure. She was wearing what appeared to be a chef's hat modified for her species, complete with holes for her impressive crest. You have to try this new recipe we developed. It combines thorian protein synthesis with crystalline mineral enhancement and coalition spice harmonics. It tastes like victory, Grux added, holding up what looked like a glowing meatball that pulsed with its own inner light. His usual military armor had been replaced with an apron that read, "Kiss the cook if you dare," which was simultaneously the most terrifying and adorable thing Jake had ever seen. The nutritional profile is extraordinary, Vextel chimed in, their crystalline form now sporting what appeared to be a bow tie made of compressed sugar crystals. We've managed to create a food item that provides complete sustenance while simultaneously triggering endorphin responses in 17 different species. The diplomatic applications are revolutionary. Jake leaned back in his chair, which was now significantly more comfortable thanks to the cushions Quillen had sent him, made from some kind of coalition fabric that adjusted to body temperature and stress levels. Let me guess. The Andromedans and the Spiral Arm Collective are fighting over mining rights again. Actually, no, Quillen said, her voice carrying pride that would have been impossible 6 months ago. We solved that one yesterday with a batch of your grandmother's chocolate chip cookie recipe and some of Grux's fermented battle juice. Turns out they were both trying to mine the same asteroid because their respective governments had given them identical orders due to a clerical error. The real reason we're calling, Grux said, his massive frame somehow managing to look sheepish, is that we've been approached by the High Council of Rigel about a situation in the Outer Rim. Apparently, there's a 12-way dispute over a planet that nobody actually wants, but everyone's afraid to back down from claiming. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and bewilderment that had become his default emotional state. Let me guess, they want the full Martinez method treatment. With a twist, Vextel added, their voice carrying the excited harmonics that Jake had learned meant they were about to suggest something either brilliant or catastrophic. They want us to cater the event, all 3 of our cultures working together, to create a feast designed specifically for diplomatic breakthrough. We're calling it Operation Last Supper, Quillen said, then immediately looked mortified. Oh, sorry, that's probably culturally insensitive to human religious traditions. We could call it Operation Final Feast instead, or Mission Munchies. I'm open to suggestions. Jake couldn't help but laugh. 6 months ago, Quillen would have apologized for apologizing, then apologized for the apology about the apology. Now she was confidently pitching diplomatic operations with food-based code names. You know what the craziest part of all this is? Jake said, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a bag of his emergency trail mix. Nobody has tried to shoot anyone in 6 months. The Galactic War Crimes Tribunal is thinking about converting their facilities into cooking schools because business has dropped so dramatically. His computer chimed again, this time with an urgent priority message from Earth Command. Jake opened it, expecting another request for diplomatic consultation, but instead found a message that made him nearly choke on his almonds. Effective immediately, he read aloud. Jake Martinez is promoted to Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Culinary Relations, with full authority to establish snack-based diplomatic protocols throughout the galaxy. Congratulations on accidentally preventing what our military analysts estimate would have been at least 14 separate wars through the strategic application of junk food. The 3 aliens on the screen cheered, which created a sound like wind chimes having a party, with a brass band in the middle of a birdsong symphony. Does this mean you get a bigger office? Grux asked hopefully. Because I've been working on a recipe for something I call warrior waffles that requires a lot of preparation space. It means, Jake said, looking around his delicatessen office with something approaching contentment, that I get to keep doing the weirdest job in the galaxy, and apparently I'm getting paid more to do it. He stood up and walked over to the window, which offered a view of the main concourse of Harmony 7. 6 months ago it had been a sterile corridor filled with nervous diplomats and barely contained hostility. Now it looked like the galaxy's most diverse food court, with beings from dozens of species sharing meals and actually talking to each other instead of through each other. You know what I think the real secret is? Jake said, turning back to his friends on the screen. It's not really about the food. It's about giving people permission to be human, or, whatever the equivalent is for crystalline beings and warrior rhinos and nervous bird people. Permission to be human, Vextel repeated thoughtfully. That's quite profound for someone who stumbled into diplomacy by accident. Hey, I resent that, Jake protested. I didn't stumble into diplomacy. Diplomacy stumbled into me. I was just trying to make sure everyone had enough snacks. And somehow, Quillen said softly, that turned out to be exactly what everyone needed. Jake looked at his 3 friends, former enemies who had bonded over pop rocks and pizza, who were now traveling the galaxy solving conflicts with the strategic application of comfort food. He thought about the dozens of other disputes that had been resolved using similar methods, about the cooking schools replacing weapons factories, about the fact that the most dangerous thing in most diplomatic negotiations these days was the risk of food coma. You know what? He said, raising his coffee mug in a toast to the screen. I think we might have accidentally figured out how to fix the galaxy. Snack at a time, Grux rumbled approvingly. Snack at a time, Jake agreed. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what his old logistics job would have thought about the fact that making sure everyone had enough to eat had somehow become the most important diplomatic skill in the known universe. But then Quillen started explaining her new recipe for quantum-infused cookies that supposedly tasted different depending on your emotional state, and Jake decided that some questions were better left unexamined. He looked. After all, he had a galaxy to feed, and apparently that was the same thing as having a galaxy to save. Who knew?